Hello and welcome to another episode of What's Bugging You. I'm your host, Chesley Elkins, here with my co-host.
I'm Brian Victor, and we have a special guest here. Before we introduce him, let's hear a word from our sponsor.
Preventive Pest Control. Taking care of the pests you see and the ones you don't see. Preventive Pest Control. It's as simple as that.
So this is Michael Swanson. He is an associate certified entomologist. He has plenty of years of experience in the pest control industry. He is currently the commercial accounts manager and technical director with Preventative Pest Control.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about bugs.
Yeah, we're right here in the middle of the monsoon season right now, the beginning of August. Today we just wanted to talk some about some of the things that we're seeing out there, issues that people are bringing to us, and some things that we'd like people to know about some of these pests out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now what we're seeing a lot of is flying insects of all types, right? So we're getting people freaking out about the mosquitoes, justifiably. I mean, you can't, everywhere I go, people are asking about the mosquitoes.
Yeah, my wife is constantly showing me the new bites she got on her legs, and she gets mad at me because I guess I don't get them as much as her, but are some people more susceptible to mosquito bites?
I think there's evidence for that, that some people are just, for whatever reason, biologically more attractive to
She's more attractive than me, so probably why.
Yeah, and the mosquitoes certainly, and what's really rough is that the mosquitoes we have now in Albuquerque, even different from what it was 5 years ago, they're really common inside. So people are getting bit, at night when they're getting ready for bed and they haven't been outside all day long, which is really frustrating because you don't have any control over it, and nobody wants to put on insect repellent to hang out inside. And so it's tough, understandably.
Well, you mentioned at night. It's one thing I've noticed this year, or probably the last 2 years, is that I see them flying around in the daytime. And I know that's mosquitoes typically that in the past, that other species we've had have been more of nighttime flyers, evening flyers. Is there a change in what we're having now, more daytime flyers? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons is there's a new species that has been in Albuquerque for the last few years, and their behavior is entirely different, the Aedes aegypti mosquito. And so, they're flying around during the day. They're breeding more indoors along with outdoors. And so what we used to think about in terms of behaviors that we could take to avoid mosquitoes just don't work anymore. So yeah, it's really rough.
So if somebody is experiencing those mosquitoes inside, what are like the top things that they can do to provide some relief?
The best thing is to just make sure that go around, look at your house critically. Are your screens in good shape? Make sure you're not leaving the door propped open. If you've got a door for your pets, maybe think about getting a good seal on that. Really just make your house much more impenetrable to things that are flying inside. They're going to make their way inside at some point, but at least you can reduce the numbers.
Is there anything you do in the yard? I know things like moisture management and stuff, and dumping old flower pots over or whatever. Anything along those lines you could do? You
can certainly remove all the standing water in the yard, but I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make, to be honest with you, because you've got neighbors, you've got just landscaping elements that every time it rains it's going to fill up with water. And these mosquitoes will lay their eggs not just in water, but in areas that are likely to collect water. So even if there's no water standing in that pot or whatever now, when it rains, that could already be pre-established with mosquito eggs, and you just kind of.
It's a pretty short cycle too, right?
Yeah, it's just days. Yeah. Some people have taken to putting out 5-gallon buckets of water and then just putting in those little mosquito dunks you can get at the hardware store, which kill the larvae as sort of like an attractant. So like you have a water source ready for these mosquitoes to breed in, but with the poison in it. And that it kind of works, but again, it's supplemental.
Is there anything like natural? I know people talk about citronella plants or different type of plants you can put in. And
yeah.
Is that helpful at all? Or?
So some people like to use those tiki torches in the backyard, and that works. We kind of have to use a lot of them, maybe ring it around the area where you're hanging out, and that will reduce them. There's some expensive propane attractant and traps that you can put out in the yard. But again, that's an investment, and they take a lot of maintenance.
How much are you talking investment?
They start, I think, at around $400 or $500.
Really?
Yeah.
And it probably doesn't. I know. Was it do it puts off CO2?
Yeah, so it burns the propane and makes an attractant for the mosquitoes, and then it has essentially like a fan with a trap inside of it where it collects them. Yeah.
So for practical measures, we're most likely talking about applying something to your skin.
That's what I do, honestly, is if I know I'm going to be outside and I don't want to get bit. I mean, I'm one of those lucky people where the mosquito bites really don't. I mean, they're irritating for like 5 minutes and then I just don't notice it anymore. Some people get really irritated by them. But yeah, I just put on mosquito repellent or wear long sleeves and pants if I'm going to be outside.
Well, I remember it's probably all the rage, all the news about what maybe 10 years ago, the West Nile, or was it Zika, one of those two?
Yep.
Are those things still something to worry about?
Yeah, and well, I don't know if worry is the right word. Certainly maybe be aware of in the back of your mind, but there's no evidence that those diseases that are passed along by mosquitoes are really prevalent in Albuquerque that I'm aware of. But the species that we have here do have the capacity to transmit those diseases. So certainly something to know about, but I think worried is a strong word because it's just we don't see the evidence of a lot of cases of it.
Good. Any areas of town more prevalent?
No, really. They're all over. It used to be, just stay away from the Bosque and you're okay, and these things are everywhere. From the far northeast heights out to West Mesa and everything in between.
So if I'm just a homeowner, is there anything I could just go spray my whole yard down? It's going to help at all?
Yeah. I wouldn't. There's not much benefit for that, and then you're just introducing a lot of insecticides without a target, which I think is counter to current pest control philosophies.
Gotcha.
So aside from the mosquitoes, we get some other flying bugs, this time of year. Definitely, the just regular flies, house flies or whatever that we see. What are some things that people can do to help with those?
Right, yeah. So flies, certainly it's the same thing. Just make sure that your screens are in good shape and that you don't leave your door open. On the inside, some people like to use fly paper. I think it's kind of tacky, pardon the pun, but you can also make sure your trash is cleaned up outside, and that if your dog goes to the bathroom outside, make sure that's cleaned up, and just reduce the things the flies are going to breed on. That makes a big difference. But state fairs are right around the corner, and we're going to have a lot of flies too.
Why is that? Is the moisture, or is just the?
Well, it's monsoon season, but also it's certainly in that part of town and areas like in the North Valley where there's a lot of livestock and just more things that breed flies, you're going to have a lot of flies.
Yeah, I mean, again, I live on the west side of the Rancho, and I feel like I have more flies this year than I've ever.
Yeah, it's been a wet summer, so absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's more when we get moisture when the monsoon comes. It elevates the population of everything, right? There's more roaches, there's more spiders, there's more ants, there's more flies. It's just more of everything.
Yeah, for a lot of those crawling insects, our regular application of, doing a little perimeter barrier around the house helps out with those. But I know that with the flies, has to be more of a cooperative effort with things, cleaning up the dog poop in the yard or making sure trash is thrown away and you're not leaving any sort of dead animals outside or anything like that.
That's actually a pretty good practice, with or without flies.
Sure.
Yeah, clean up your dead animals.
Is there any residential? I know fly lights work really well for us in commercial setting. Is there? Do you know of any residential type?
So there are small ones that looks like a night light that you can put in, but they just don't have the surface area to be terribly effective. I've been doing an experiment at my house with a big commercial one, kind of in a room far away from any doors to see. And I was surprised. I had, in the span of a month, well over 100 captures of flying insects. And it's not just flies. And I think when looking at those captures, what is really interesting is how many of small flies that we deal with too. And that's really become a big concern with people. So some people say, I have gnats in my house, and that's kind of a catch-all term that can be a lot of different species. The main ones that we see in homes and businesses around here are fungus gnats, which are small little, those actually are gnats, and they feed on fungus in the soil and also like the roots of plants. And they just become a nuisance because when it's so wet outside, you get a lot of them flying inside and they bug people. Also, we get fruit flies that are coming up all over throughout the summer, and those are really easy to control just by making sure that you don't have rotting fruit around, right? So some people forget, there's a bag of potatoes that falls behind the dryer or something, and that's 2 months later you've got fruit flies over the house and you can't figure out where they're coming from. So just being aware of things that they might breed on is a good way to get rid of them.
So with fungus gnats, because I know we bring fruit in, and I know what a fruit fly looks like, but they're not flies, they're gnats.
Right.
Are they attracted to rotting fruit too as well? Or?
Not so much, no.
Or it's a different type of gnat?
It's an entirely different species. Yeah. And so they're larva is adapted to feed on plant material, usually underground in the soil. They can feed on decaying material too, but you just don't see it as much.
So if you're having gnats, a lot of times you might either same kind of thing you do mosquitoes, making sure doors are shut, or if you have potted plants, a lot of times in the house.
Yeah, one of the biggest things we get is people overwater their ornamental plants, their potted plants inside the house, and then they just have year-round this population of these fungus gnats flying around, and they can't figure out why. And we just tell them, there's nothing to spray, just back off the watering of your ficus or whatever, and it makes a difference.
Could they, if they want some immediately relief from that, is there any measures they can take?
You can take the plant outside. You can repot it into fresh soil. That actually helps pretty well. But in terms of insecticides, no.
Okay.
Fungus gnats are pretty resistant to pyrethroids, and you can kill all the adults, but that does nothing to the larvae that are in the soil. So they're just going to be replenished the next day.
So I used to tell people that had potted plants to put like a little layer of gravel on top of that. Does that help at all, or am I just giving them bad advice?
Yeah, I think that's maybe not bad advice. Some instances where there's a lot of mulch that holds the moisture in actually makes it so it's more hospitable environment. So the idea of putting gravel over it to make it harder for the adults to get down in the soil to lay their eggs, I think that maybe could help, but in some cases we've seen where it holds the moisture and it makes it worse. So there's no silver bullet. You can order online little nematodes, little tiny kind of microscopic worms that you just put into the soil and they feed on the larva. But that's a little, I think, esoteric for most homeowners to start importing.
That's a big word. What's esoteric?
Yeah. And then besides that, so you got the fruit flies, you have fungus gnats. The other one is drain flies. And those are really common too. And those look like tiny little moths. They have a wide wingspan and they're hairy, but they're really small like a fruit fly. And those are associated with drains. So we get a lot of that in Albuquerque, especially in older neighborhoods, or if people have an issue with like a plumbing line that might be broken in their house, you start seeing these things flying around in the bathroom. That really is an indication that you need to maybe take a look at your plumbing.
So someone in a residential area having these flies, they think they're drain flies, or they're going to see them around the sink areas where they're going to see them? Or
Yep, usually you see them in the bathroom. They don't stray too far away from their source of where they're coming out.
And is there anything they can do themselves, or they need a plumber?
Really just maybe do some home cleaning of like if you've got gunk around the top part of the pipe for the drain for the sink or the tub. That's not it's a good idea anyway. That's good, kind of home hygiene. But if you feel like your drains are pretty clean and you're still getting a lot of these things coming in, I think it'd be a good idea to call a plumber. Maybe they need to scope it and see if there's something more significant happening further down the line.
Probably make sure you ID it correctly first. Be sure it is a drain fly, right?
Yeah,
Not something else.
absolutely.
Right?
That's the key with all these things, right? Because a small fly looks like a small fly to the untrained eye. So knowing if it's a fungus gnat versus a drain fly is going to make your efforts to get rid of them way different. That's absolutely right.
Well, with that being said, we're going to shift gears and go into our mailbag and answer some questions. We got Rick asking, actually coincides with what we were talking about, are Venus fly traps effective for controlling flies in the house?
No. But I think you should get them because they're a very cool plant, and I'm a big fan of just increasing biology around our homes and making things more interesting. So you should absolutely get one, but I think you would have to have a lot of Venus flytraps for it to be like a significant control factor.
So not going to do any harm for sure.
It's not going to hurt, and they're cool.
But you might get more fungus gnats if you're watering that potted plant
Actually,
inside.
that's funny. That may be the case. I don't think you have to water them.
Does it self-feeding? It just catches its own gnats after.
I think that'd be hilarious. So Venus flytraps, big fan of them, but no, they're not going to solve your fly problem.
Gotcha.
Not like Little Shop of Horrors. What was the name of that plant in that movie?
Audrey 2. Audrey 2. Yep.
That's funny. We have another question from Shelley. With increased rains we're having right now, what can I do about my weeds?
Oh, yeah. And weeds are a big issue, right? Because they make your home look unkept, but they're also a big factor for bugs, too. And we see that throughout the year. Certainly you can pull them. That's what a lot of people do. You can hire a company to come out and do a spray, a couple times a year, especially around the xeriscape areas, and that makes a big difference. So you can have an application made in your rocks in the spring and then again in the fall, and what that does is not only kill the little weeds that are growing up, but it makes it so the soil doesn't allow new growth to sprout come springtime. And so that's when people really see the value of that. is having that stop the weed growth before it even starts. So springtime comes around, you look at your neighbors' yards, and you've got 3-foot weeds coming up by March. And your yard is perfectly clean. So I think a lot of people find value in that.
There's a good value, too, as far as pest control issues, too. It helps cut back on rodents or harbor areas or other bugs and type of stuff, just having the weeds cut back, right? So
I think that can't be understated. Mice, certainly. We're going to start seeing mice coming up, and we'll maybe talk about that later on in another episode. But as it gets colder, we don't really think about that right now in the heat of summer, but in just a few months, you're going to be having a big issue with mice looking for places to hang out to get warmth. And the more weeds you have around your house, the more harborage you have for those mice. So it's a good idea just to think ahead year-round about reducing things in your and around your house that are comfortable for bugs and other pests.
And we know that the monsoon is going to pretty much increase activity of pretty much all insects, but is there any ones that stand out in your mind that just begin to become a little more prevalent than the others at this time?
Yeah, for me, it's the centipedes. We really start seeing centipedes probably throughout the summer, but it coincides with the monsoon, and we see them active a lot. And the centipedes we get here, they're the desert centipedes, they're about the size of this, but thicker, and scare the crap out of people, and they do have kind of a painful bite.
He's holding up a pen for those listening on Spotify.
I'm holding up a normal-sized pen. So we get big desert centipedes, and you can make applications around the outside and the inside of your house, just basic pest control applications, or hire a company to do it. And you can make a big dent in their population around the house if you don't want them. But yeah, I think they're fascinating, but they're kind of monstrous.
Yeah, they definitely look intimidating, and you don't want to get a bite by one, whether, not necessarily. I think I grew up thinking that they were deadly somehow, that a bite from one of those would kill you, and usually not going to be the case, but it can definitely sting a lot.
Yeah, it would. It would be like getting a bee sting. It would be very irritating.
Right.
Yeah.
An overall summary, I guess, the way to sum up on today's episode is pretty much if you do 3 things, you're going to take care of a lot of pest problems in your house. Like one, just seal your house up, keep the door shut, screens closed. Seal up any holes you might have. What was the other one, Mike?
Don't overwater.
Don't overwater.
Plants.
Don't overwater your plants. That's a big one. And probably keep things like weeds down.
Yep.
Keep harborage areas to a minimum in your yard for pests. So.
Yep. Those are 3 things you can do. And clean up the trash as well. But just do those simple things, which most people are doing anyway, and that's going to make a big difference to keep
those 3 things
pests
will.
down.
All pests. Keep all pests down for you. So,
And we'd like to thank our guest today, Mike Swanson, for being here and being an expert in answering a lot of these questions. Again, we're from Preventative Pest Control, and if you have any other questions that we might have popped up for you, feel free to give us a call, 505-792-8380. We're always happy to offer some advice to people and help them control their pests, either whether they do it themselves or if there's something we can help out with some professional products and professionally trained technicians. We're always happy to do that for people as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks again, Mike. Always appreciate having you out here and using your knowledge. You're a bright guy, and Chesley, and thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe, and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription.